like to transport you into a story. Come and join me by the campfire, and I will read to you a bit from the dark fantasy story titled The Nameless City. This is Birger Reads. Against the choking sand cloud I plodded towards this temple, which as I neared it loomed larger than the rest. I would have entered had not the terrific force of the icy wind almost quenched my torch. It poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it ruffled the sand and spread about the weird ruins. I was more afraid than I could explain. So soon as the wind was quite gone, I crossed into the dark chamber from which it had come. This temple, as I had fancied from the outside, was larger than either of those I had visited before, and was presumably a natural cavern, since it bore winds from some region beyond. Here I could stand upright, but saw that the stones and altars were as low as those in the other temples. On the walls and roof I beheld for the first time some traces of the pictorial art of the ancient race. Curious curling streaks of paint that had almost faded or crumbled away, and on two of the altars I saw with rising excitement a maze of well-fashioned curvilinear carvings. As I held my torch aloft, it seemed to me that the shape of the roof was too regular to be natural. And I wondered what the prehistoric cutters of stone had first worked upon. Their engineering skill must have been vast. Then a bright flare of the fantastic flame skewed me that for which I had been seeking, the opening to those remoter abysses whence the southern wind had blown. And I grew faint when I saw that it was a small and plainly artificial door, chiseled in the solid rock. I thrust my torch within, beholding a black tunnel with a roof arching low over a rough flight of very small, numerous and steeply descending steps. I shall always remember those steps in my dreams, for I came to learn what they meant. At the time I hardly knew whether to call them steps or mere footholds in a precipitous descent. My mind was whirling with mad thoughts, and the words and warnings of Arab prophets seemed to float across the desert from the lands that the men know to the nameless city that men dare not know. Yet I hesitated only a moment before advancing through the portal and commencing to climb cautiously down the steep passage, feet first as though on a ladder. It is only in the terrible phantasm of drugs or delirium that any other man can have had such a descent as mine. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and the torch I held above my head could not light the unknown depths toward which I was crawling. I lost track of the hours and forgot to consult my watch, though I was frightened when I thought of the distance I must have been traversing. There were changes of direction and of steepness, and once I came to a long, low-level passage where I had to wriggle feet first through the rocky floor, holding my torch at arm's length beyond my head. The place was not high enough for kneeling. After that were more of the steep steps, and I was still scrambling down interminably when my failing torch died out. I do not think I noticed it at the time, for when I had noticed it, I was still holding it high above me, as if it were ablaze. I was quite unbalanced with that instinct for the strange and the unknown, which has made me a wanderer upon earth and a haunter of far ancient and forbidden places. In the darkness there flashed before my mind fragments of my cherished treasury of demonic lore, sentences from Al-Sared the Mad Arab, paragraphs from the crippled nightmares of Damascus, and infamous lines from the delirious Image du Monde of Gauthier de Metz. I repeated queer extracts and muttered of Afrasiab and the demons that floated with him down to Oxus, later chanting over and over again a phrase from one of Lord Dunsany's tales, the unreverberate blackness of the abyss. Once when the descent grew amazingly steep, I recited something in the sing-song from Thomas Moore until I feared to recite more. A reservoir of darkness, black as a witch's cauldrons are, when filled with the moon drugs in eclipse distilled, leaning to look if foot might pass down through that chasm I saw beneath. As far as vision could explore, the yeti sides as smooth as glass, looking as if just vanished doer. With that dark pitch the sea of death throws out upon its slimy shore. Time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt the level floor, and I found myself in a place slightly higher than the rooms in the two smaller temples, now so incalculably far above my head. I could not quite stand, but could kneel upright, and in the dark I shuffled and crept hither and thither at random. I soon knew that I was in a narrow passage whose walls were lined with cases of wood having glass fronts. As in that Paleosonic and abysmal place I felt of such things as polished wood and glass, I shuddered at the possible implications. The cases were apparently arranged along each side of the passage, regular intervals, and were oblong and horizontal. When I tried to move 2 or 3 for further examination, I found that they were firmly fastened. I saw that the passage was a long one, so I floundered ahead rapidly in a creeping run that would have seemed horrible had any eye watched me in the blackness, crossing from side to side occasionally to feel of my surroundings and be sure the walls and rows of cases still stretched on. Man is so used to thinking visually that I almost forgot the darkness and pictured the endless corridor of wood and glass, and then, in a moment of indescribable emotion, I did see it. Just when my fancy merged into real sight I cannot tell, but there came a gradual glow ahead, and all at once I knew that I saw the dim outlines of the corridor, revealed by some unknown subterranean phosphorescence. For a little while all was exactly as I had imagined it, since the glow was very faint, but as I mechanically kept on stumbling ahead into the stronger light, I realized that my fancy had been but feeble. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above, but a monument of the most magnificent and exotic art. Rich, vivid and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural paintings whose lines and colors were beyond description. The cases were of a strange golden wood, with fronts of exquisite glass, and contained the mummified forms of creatures, outstretching in grotesqueness and most chaotic dreams of a man. To convey any idea of these monstrosities is impossible. They were of the reptile kind, with body lines suggesting sometimes the crocodile, sometimes the seal, but more often nothing of which either the naturalist or the paleontologist ever heard. In size they approximated a small man, and their forelegs bore delicate and evidently flexible feet, curiously like human hands and fingers. But strangest of all were their heads, which presented a contour violating all known biological principles. To nothing can such things be well compared in one flash. I thought of comparison as varied as the cat, the bulldog, the mystic satyr, and the human being. Not Jove himself had so colossal and protuberant as a forehead, yet the horns and noselessness and the alligator-like jaw placed the things outside all established categories. I debated for a time on the reality of the mummies, half expecting they were artistical idols, but soon decided there were indeed Paleogen species which had lived when the nameless city was alive. To crown their grotesqueness, most of them were gorgeously enrobed in the costliest of fabrics and lavishly laden with ornaments of gold, jewels, and unknown shining metals. The importance of these crawling creatures must have been vast, for they held first place among the wild designs on the fresco walls and ceilings. With matchless skill had the artists drawn them in a world of their own, wherein they had cities and gardens fashioned to suit their dimensions, and I could not but think that their pictured history was allegorical, perhaps shewing the progress of the race that worshipped them. These creatures, I said to myself, were to the men of the nameless city what the she-wolf was to Rome, or some totem beast is to a tribe of Indians. Holding this view, I thought I could trace roughly a wonderful epic of the nameless city, the tale of a mighty sea-coast metropolis that ruled the world before the Africa rose out of the waves, and of its struggles as the sea shrank away, and the desert crept into the fertile valley that held it. I saw its wars and triumphs, its troubles and defeats, and afterwards its terrible fight against the desert when thousands of its people, here represented in allegory by the grotesque reptiles, were driven to chisel their way down through the rocks in some marvelously manner to another world, whereof their prophets had told them. It was so vividly weird and realistic, and its connection with the awesome descent I had made was unmistakable. I even recognized the passages. As I crept along the corridor towards the brighter light, I saw later stages of painted epic, the leaf talking of the race that had dwelt in the nameless city and the valley around for 10 million years. The race whose souls shrank from quitting scenes the bodies had known so long, where they had settled as nomads in the earth's youth, hewing in the virgin rock those primal shrines at which they never ceased to worship. Now that the light was better, I studied the pictures more closely, and remembering that the strange reptiles must represent the unknown men, pondered upon the customs of the nameless city. Many things were peculiar and inexplicable. The civilization, which included the written alphabet, had seemingly risen to a higher order than those immeasurably later civilizations of Egypt and Chaldea. Yet there were curious omissions. I could, for example, find no pictures to represent deaths or funeral customs, save such as were related to wars, violence, and plagues. and I wondered at the reticence shown concerning natural death. It was as though an ideal of earthly immortality had been fostered as a cheering illusion. Still nearing the end of the passage were painted scenes of the utmost picturesqueness and extravagance, contrasted views of the nameless city in its desertion and growing ruins, and of the strange new realm of paradise to which the race had hewed its way through the stone. In these new views, the city and the desert valley were shown almost by moonlight, a golden nimbus hovering over the fallen walls and half revealing the splendid perfection of former times, shown spectrally and elusively by the artist. The paradisal scenes were almost too extravagant to be believed, portraying a hidden world of eternal day filled with glorious cities and ethereal hills and valleys. At the very long last, I thought I saw signs of an artistic anticlimax. The paintings were less skillful and much more bizarre than even the wildest of the earlier scenes. They seemed to record a slow decadence of the ancient stock, coupled with a growing ferocity toward the outside world on which it was driven by the desert. The forms of the people, always represented by the sacred reptiles, appeared to be gradually wasting away, though their spirit as shown hovering about the ruins by moonlight gained in proportion. Emaciated priests displayed as reptiles in ornate robes cursed the upper air and all who breathed it, and one terrible final scene showed a primitive looking man, perhaps a pioneer of ancient Irem and the city of pillars, torn to pieces by members of the elder race. There are more parts of this story coming up here on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe, leave a like, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment below. I write my own dark fantasy stories, which are inspired by spirituality, which you can check out by going to my Patreon in this link up here, or in the link in the description. And a special thanks to all of my patrons. You're the reason I can do this, so I'm really grateful.